if you focused on a random part of the world for 10 years, you might be like a top 0.1% in that industry, right? If you're super tech, like let's say you're really technical, blah, 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 whatever, and you go into like roofing, or you go into like, some really niche part of the economy, right? You could be credibly one of the most important people in that industry in 10 years, either because you build a big company entrepreneurially, or even if you just work for someone else, because you have so much domain knowledge. It's like, and then you come pitch me for money to go start your company. And I'm like, this person's like, there's like 5 of these people in the world who could have gone to McKinsey or Google or whatever. And instead, they spent 10 years obsessing over this weird part of the world. And if you really like business, every business can become interesting.
You're thinking of building a company or already run a company that is not registered, but you want to get registered. I've looked at a lot of solutions, and one of the best ones in the market right now is Doula. I reached out to Arjun, who is actually the founder of Doula.com. I asked him if he'd like to work together on the podcast. He was like, of course. Doula is sort of a platform that helps founders and businesses form and manage US companies, regardless of where they live. If someone is living in India, for example, and wants to start a company and get it registered in the US, he or she can do it by using Doula.com. Doula helps in forming the company. It can be an LLC, C Corp, or you name it. Doula offers a US address and a bank account to users, which can allow you to conduct business transactions that you can receive and send payments no matter where you live in the world from the United States. And other than that, they also provide tax consultation to the users, which is an incredible feature. And Doula simplifies the process of establishing and managing a US company, and especially for founders that are not in the US. And regardless of where they live, you can get your company registered with Doula.com. To check out Doula, go to doula.com/exerton. That is DOOLA.com/EXERTON.
Hey Drew, how are you? Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Before we get to the other stuff that we have planned out, let's start with who's Drew? Who are you?
Well, I guess I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa, and I had a great childhood there. But I was pretty much, looking to get out of Iowa as quickly as possible, which is funny because now I love it and go back a lot. But I was obsessed with 2 things when I was growing up. One was golf, and one was investing. And I read this book. I didn't have a lot of touch points to investing growing up, so I kind of read everything I could. And I read this book, Earnings at the Gate, which is the sort of story of, or one of the stories of Henry Kravis and George Roberts building KKR. And they both went to Claremont McKenna. And so when I got a recruiting letter for golf from them, my mom sort of reminded me that was, that the school was, even though it was a really small one, was the one they'd gone to. So I figured that was probably good enough for me. So I went there, studied math, and while I was there, I was really lucky to have a bunch of sort of formative experiences, which culminated in me being introduced to my long-term business partner, Joe Lonsdale, who I still work with today. And he was looking for a chief of staff, and a friend of mine from Claremont who had left early to work at Adapar, a guy named Clint Paulus, who I always say his name because I owe a lot to him. He introduced me to Joe, and because he didn't want to do that job, and so that's kind of the origin stories of what where I came from, and just very fortunate to meet Joe very early on, really at the very beginning of my career, and we've worked together ever since.
And Joe Lonsdale, for the people who might not know,
when he was just starting off in 19 or 20 or so, he was an intern at PayPal for Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, and then after it sold, he started working with Peter at his family office and working on a project which ultimately became Palantir. And so he was co-founder of Palantir and built that up. And then he left Palantir and started a company called Adapar, which is now one of the largest sort of vertical SaaS companies. It's the leading sort of system of record company for wealth management. And so he was the CEO there still when I started working with him.
Before we get to the main stuff that we plan out, I really want to talk about Joe. The Joe is sort of one of those unique people who has a great track record of building incredible things. And what I have seen with the people that I've had the chance of talking to, like some people get lucky once or twice, but doing that repeatedly, like 3 or 4 times, that gets tough. What do you think is the biggest thing have you learned from Joe? I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount from him, given that really he's been pretty much the only boss and business partner and obviously close friend. But I mean, I think so. Yeah. So Joe, other than Palantir and Anapar, he also started a company called OpenGov. He co-founded that with Zach Bookman, and that company was bought recently for about $2 billion. It's sort of as a system of record for state and local governments. And I think that, and then he started a couple other multi-billion-dollar companies as well. And I think OpenGov is interesting because it probably illustrates Joe's biggest skill the best. So, yeah, Joe's unbelievably smart, but there's a lot of smart people. He's very, very creative, very good at attracting resources and stuff. And I think those are, more unique maybe than being smart, but they're more common in Silicon Valley than maybe you'd think. The thing that I think is most unique about Joe is his pain tolerance. He is probably more willing to do things that are uncomfortable, require lots of discipline, require rejection, require tons of iteration, and require time than anyone else I've met, especially anyone else who's been as successful as he has, and is still willing to do it. Because many people will do that the first or maybe the second time, but at some point they say, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But every day it's almost like day zero when I work with him. He is unbelievably just tenacious, long-term oriented, and frankly very, very disciplined in the way he spends his time, and I think that's probably his greatest unfair advantage.
I'll pick you on the first one. You talk about smartness there. We see a lot of smart people around, smart people in school, smart people in colleges, smart people and stuff. What really is the smartness which founders require? Because not every smart person in school is a good founder and vice versa. What does that smartness that Joe has or other smart, quote-unquote smart people have that differentiates?
Raw intelligence probably has marginal value above a certain point, except for maybe if you're starting something like deeply technical. And even then, a lot of it's actually kind of hard to know whether a deeply, deeply technical person is like how much value they're getting beyond a certain amount from just pure IQ versus from applied knowledge, right? And then other things so even in like abstract mathematics or quantum physics, if you talk to like the best people in those fields, they'll tell you like, oh yeah, like I'm not the smartest, but maybe say they work the hardest, right? Or they say that they do the most like sort of cross-pollination between other disciplines or whatever. And I think that's probably true, right? I mean, like if you think about it in athletics, the person with the most raw sort of, genetic talent, is going to have a huge leg up, but it's pretty unlikely that they're actually the best just because of that. Like Michael Jordan, practiced a ton, right? He didn't even make his first, basketball team. So within any discipline, there's probably like marginal return, but in some places like abstract physics, the bar is probably much higher, right? Like you probably have to have like 140 IQ to like become a world's top quantum physics minimally. Whereas like in startups, I don't even know if you need to be above average, frankly. So that leads to answer your question, which is, I think that in startups, people over attribute to IQ what actually is a combination of IQ, EQ, and then the previous set of experiences, whether those are were intentional, because there are people who certainly have put themselves in the right rooms to then start something. So this really long-term orientation, right? And make the right decisions. And then, some of these other factors that don't fit neatly into an EQ or IQ bucket, right? Work ethic, does that fall in there? Creativity, discipline, their willingness to prioritize one thing and deprioritize other things, right? And I think especially in business in the United States, and this is probably true in it's probably true in India, it's probably true in any democracy with a real free market. I think you'd be surprised by how many people actually are massively successful who have average to maybe even below average IQs. I know it's true in the US. I would imagine it's true in any place where there's not a top-down filter saying the smartest people at this university also become the executives. The other things are so important, right? And so it's something that I think about a lot. I think Peter Thiel recently just said that above 135 IQ, it's unclear whether there's actually any value at all being added. So again, I think in startups, they're really a combination of smarts, and you need certain people on your team who are going to have skills that require really high intelligence, and then you're going to need other things too. And I think that, going back to put a bow on the conversation about Joe, he is also one of the best people at first principles thinking about talent and being able to realize that you don't actually want a group of people to all look the same and have the same strengths, and therefore there's probably the same weaknesses. You really do want spikes, and if you're going to hire for spike, you're going to tolerate the other part of the spike, which is big gaps in other areas. And the idea is to fill an organization with a set of different spikes, as opposed to just hiring the same person for each thing.
We're on the same topic of the IQ part. How much of do you think Joe has done it repeatedly several times throughout his career, quote unquote, if you call it that way? You have done it a lot. How do you think, how much of, if we take off it as sort of a bucket of the work that someone has done, how much of luck can really fill in for the IQ that the person has? Does that make sense?
I tend to think that luck doesn't fill in for these more sort of fundamental capabilities. It tends to be more this epsilon. And the debate is is the epsilon a linear operator? Is it an exponential operator? Where is it, right? How fundamental to the sort of outcome is it? I would say it's always great to be lucky. There's no one who doesn't want to be lucky. And if they tell you that, they're full of shit. I mean, basically, if you think about what luck means, it's hey, I hope, I understand that there's some sort of non-deterministic factors in the world, right? And even if they are deterministic, I can't control them, so they might as well be probabilistic. And so I just hope that those go in my favor, right? And so I don't view it as if you're really, really smart but unlucky, you can somehow weigh that against being really dumb and lucky. Because at least not unless you look at life in a super simplistic materialistic framework. If you're just looking at it in the sense of material wealth, yeah, I mean, there's people who are lucky in the sense that they're born very wealthy, and it doesn't really necessarily matter what happens to them, on that one metric. But life is so much more than just, wealth or, materialistic value or whatever. And it's the same reason why, so I just think about I definitely think about luck. And I think there are ways that you can set yourself up to be ready for luck and to take advantage of luck. But I view these traits IQ, EQ, hard work, creativity versus rigidity, those types of things, as separate from luck. I put luck in it's an epsilon.
When you plan out for the thing that you want to do in the future, do you leave some space for luck, or is it it's good if it happens?
I think you definitely need to. Although the way I would view it is, I think at least for me, what has been, I think, one of the most freeing things in the world has been that I have been willing to commit to one sort of goal or one sort of ambition and kind of just block out the others. And so what that's meant is, it meant I never, once the luck was revealed. So for instance, in my life, it was incredibly fortunate that I got introduced, to Joe, by Clint when I was in my early 20s. And it was luck in the sense I didn't really do very much to control for that. I guess I was a nice enough guy and seemingly was willing to do the job, right? So Clint thought of me instead of someone else. But it was basically luck, because that's totally my control, but I knew, like I was able, I think the focus I had made it say, like, this was clearly the thing I wanted to do. So I was willing to like block out all the other things, because the other things were kind of just like, I was trying to find that. And so I do think when you're early on, when you're young, people massively overvalue optionality. They massively undervalue picking something, building a passion for it, and then like peeling the sort of, onion layers in that thing. Now you may wake up, 4 or 5 years and say, oh, okay, like this wasn't what I was actually interested in doing. But now you have real data, as opposed to it just being, well, I think I'm interested in this, but this other thing is interesting, and so is this other thing, and like I'm going to do all these things. And the reality is, there's tons of really, really smart, hardworking, credentialed young people who've done that. So you're competing against the same pool of people. There's not that many young people who are smart, hardworking, creative, who focus on one thing for 10 years. So and if you think about it, this always comes up in the context of like what jobs people do after college, right? So you go to this fancy college, you get this great degree, and then you're deciding all the things you can do, right? And the world's your oyster, and you have McKinsey and Goldman Sachs, Google, and whatever, right? And they're all recruiting. And they have this sort of path, right? Which is like, okay, you're going to do this, and then you're going to go to this other place, and you're going to business school, or you're going to do that, and then you're going to, then you're going to get the job that you want. The reality is, if you were in that level of sort of, raw talent, that you could go to, the world's top schools and graduate and get these types of offers. If you focused on a random part of the world for 10 years, you might be like a top 0.1% in that industry, right? If you're super tech, like let's say you're really technical, blah, 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 whatever, and you go into like roofing, or you go into like, some really niche part of the economy, right? You could be credibly one of the most important people in that industry in 10 years, either because you build a big company entrepreneurially, or even if you just work for someone else, because you have so much domain knowledge. It's like, and then you come pitch me for money to go start your company. And I'm like, this person's like, there's like 5 of these people in the world who could have gone to McKinsey or Google or whatever. And instead, they spent 10 years obsessing over this weird part of the world. And if you really like business, every business can become interesting if you think about it enough. Create passion in an area and say, I want to become the best at this. So I always tell people, who ask me, should I go to McKinsey? Should I go to investment bank? I said, they're incredible places to go. But if you don't want to be the world's best consultant, or at least pretend that you want to be for like 5 or 6 years, then you should be thinking about why you're doing it. And if the reason you're doing it is like, well, listen, this is the best job I have, I got to pay the bills, so I'm going to go there and I'm going to try to network into startups. Sure, that's a good answer, right? But like, if you work, I would encourage everyone to work at any job they're working at. And this is advice from my dad, and was reiterated later from a really good friend of mine who's been very successful. They were like, obsess over how this works, right? I worked at a gas station in high school. Learn how the business works. Learn how the people work. What does the general manager care about, right? What does the person working there care about? And if you think more than just like, hey, I'm doing some boring thing, you think about how the system starts working, right? Whether you're working at a gas station, you're working at McKinsey, or you're at a startup, I think you're going to be sort of it's going to help you develop a passion for it much faster than if you sort of think about it as, this sort of amorphous thing where you happen to sort of be for a period of time.
See, how much do you really niche down? Well, the one thing which I struggle with is like, I have certain things that I want to achieve. None of them include a lot of money or anything. I really don't. I just want like enough money to build cool stuff. Other than that, like what I struggle with is, and I think this is a good opportunity for me to clear this out, is how much of like the way in which I think right now of the world, how much of that really changes in the 10 years? So from like 15 to 25 later, how does that really progress? That's what troubles me. Like if I commit to doing something for 10 years now, if 5 or like 6 or 10 years later, I realize that that was not the right thing that I should have done. How do you really think about that?
What I would say first is, listen, it's always very hard to reflect in retrospect because you just basically sort of post facto explain anything. But what I would say is, it's impossible to, at least for me, to decouple what you've done from who you've become. There's this constant feedback loop, right? That's created by how you spend your time. And then I think there's, of course, sort of, maybe embedded biological things that become more health conscious or something, prioritize that because you realize you're getting older. Like whatever. There's, although, it is interesting to see how many people become super health interested, right, as they turn, in their 30s or something, right? Like they all start listening to all these podcasts about it, whereas before, like they never thought about it, or people, But other than that, I think it's why it's really important to think about how you spend your time professionally, because it's very likely going to be a huge percentage of your time, and the people, if you think about it as on a slightly different variable, which isn't necessarily hours in the day, it's people, it's like external people hours, right? Like how many hours are you spending with other people? And so you really spend a lot of your time, if you adjust for time with external people, which I think are the biggest inputs in, whether you're interacting with them in person or digitally or whatever, that's going to be, what influences you the most. Really what's going to changes you the most. A lot of that's going to come from how you spend your professional time. So you really need to be thoughtful around it. But I do think it's probably less important what that exact company is doing or what you're even doing in that company. And it's who you're doing it with and your, how present and really like how interested you are while you're spending that time. I think that's what ends up being, leading to sort of the most profound outcomes, for personal development.
Is the goal really important, or is the process more important? Reaching the goal, rather.
Well, what I would say is I think the end result is less important than both the goal and the process. So the end result, right? Like if we started a company and we worked on it for 10 years, right? Whether that company failed, sold for 500 million or was the next Google, right? Like the end result matters in the sense that we could either be the richest people in the world, we could be richer than almost anyone except for the founders of Google, doing really well, but we can't have our own yacht, or we could still be broke, right? Or working on our next company. But I don't know if us as people would be the experience of that 10 years, right? I think that 10 years would be, the goal we ultimately set, and then the time we spent together doing that, I think would be the biggest determinants of who we became. Now, listen, the next 10 years, right, in those three worlds, one where we're broke and we're still grinding, one where we got 20 million bucks, something, or one where we got 200 billion, the next 10 years will change us too, which is why the founders of Google are very different people now than the founders of some $100 million company that sold it, very different than the rest of us, right? So it's not to say that the end result of something, of a period of time, doesn't influence your future, but I think the person you became up to that point, it has less to do with that moment where the company sells or whatever. It has to do more with what goal did we set? What North Star for ourselves? What are we driving towards? What is this? What are our inspirational vision for the future? And then also, what did we do every single day? Right? I think those tend to be the most important things.
For you, how do you think has your way of perceiving things and doing stuff, has it changed since, like, you were into investing since you were very young, in golf too? How has that changed from when you were in teens or your like college years to how it is now?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change I think that anyone goes through when they're really young and they maybe have sort of weird ambitions for like certain things that mostly because I care about is like you sort of have like put everything on a pedestal, and I think you very quickly then like knock it down off the pedestal, and you sort of realize that that whether it's an industry or a specific person or whatever, that like they're not all that different on a day-to-day basis, right? Like there are people who actually are like profoundly compelling in person, and then it continues or increases, but it's fairly rare. Like it tends to be mostly that like as you get to know people who are like unbelievably successful, that you were your heroes. It's not that they're like charlatans or something. It's just that you see the human in them, right? I mean, they have normal human skills that are just amplified, or they're highly refined and disciplined, right? And that it tends to be like 1% or 2% a day difference that really compounds over time. And so I think that hopefully increases, your sort of confidence. You're like, and I think that's the biggest shift that happens when you're young. I think people who are, I think once you're, kind of have done things for some period of time, that most people understand that. I think the other big shift is how having like a lot of confidence in being a part of something as opposed to being the thing is really critical to success. And frankly, I think it's also pretty key to happiness. Like if you always need to be like the thing, then you're never going to build something very big by like you. If you take satisfaction in building something that's much larger than yourself, and that other people sort of really own pieces of, both economically, but really more sort of, they own it, emotionally, right? And then you can go a lot farther, I think. And that's something that I don't think you appreciate when you're young. You think you have like, because the goal in your mind's eye is to be some sort of like hero, right? Whatever. And that's not bad, right? I mean, I think that if you don't have that, it's much worse. But then I think the perception changes about what a hero is, right? Over time. And as you both see how people have become that, you see their fallibility, but also you understand, you start learning that they are just a human and that they want, other people around them to succeed too. I think that's probably one of the other big perception shifts I've had.
What does it mean to be the thing that you talk about?
Well, I mean, listen, I think if you watch a movie, right? I think movies are pretty decent at like reductionist. They have a kernel of truth and will reduce things down because it's only 2 hours. So it's like, okay, so in a movie, there tends to be one hero, and that hero maybe that hero is fallible in some big, glaring, obvious way, and they have to overcome that or whatever. Yeah, the sort of traditional sort of hero's journey. But like they are the thing, right? I mean, the movie is about them, and the enemy is the anti-hero to them, and all the other supporting characters are sort of effectively NPCs that are supporting a hero, and that's kind of how it works, right? So you could think of it as or like in video games, right? You have like a bunch of NPCs and you have a player, right? And so if you're playing a video game like that, which like we used to all play before, like massive, multiplayer games were the thing, like you were the thing, right? Like playing Age of Empires, where you don't have like Ethernet connection. It's you're playing against a bunch of sort of programmed, characters. Is not, that's what it is. It's fine. Now if you're playing a video game against 20 million people across the world, then now all of a sudden it's like way more complex, way more interesting, whatever. That's kind of what I mean by the thing. So, if you view the success as being you succeeding, then you're going to be limited, because that mindset, you might be able to become a great crypto trader or something. Like if you just sit in there's people who become very financially successful just by, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you aren't going to have a huge, you aren't going to be a hero. You're just going to be rich, that's cool. But if you took that money and you wanted to turn it into big impact in the world, you would then have to galvanize other people to build it. And I think with startups, most people in startups, it's not even about money, right? Like they want to build something important for the world. Well, actually that's true. I think it's about money and about building something that's important in the world. And if you're a founder and you don't recognize that, hey, like, yes, my job might be to go speak at a conference, or my job might be to be on a podcast, or my job might be to show up to the board meeting because I'm the CEO or whatever. That's like what I'm supposed to do. But I'm not there just because I'm so special, because I am the startup. If it's going to be big, it has to be more than that. So when I say like the thing, that's what I mean, which is it's a project, a goal, or whatever, right? It has to be shared in order to end up being valuable.
I recently, I think 3 or 4 days ago, had Alice Bentingcon from Entrepreneur First. One thing which she told me, which I think I thought about a lot, like one of our investors told her that the best founders are usually driven by one of three things, like power, money, and fame. And the best of the best are driven by solely power, like the megalomaniacs who like Mark Zuckerberg of the world. What do you think that's the same thing that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the person that they're citing there is Charlie Songhurst, or if not, then they are saying the same things. But Charlie is one of the best angel investors of all time. Been very lucky to learn a lot from him, and he talks about this a lot. And what I would say is, I agree. I think I have a strong form agreement with the idea that fame is the worst one within startups. Like if you want to be if you're an actor, I think fame might be highly aligned, right? At least with success, because it's sort of by nature. And I would view fame, I view sort of that analogy. I don't think it's actually wrong for a startup founder to want money, because the same way that like fame is derivative of being successful in acting, money is derivative of being successful in startups, right? Like you could decide to dilute yourself a lot, and give more to your employees. In that case, you individually might not be, sort of goal seeking for money. But frankly, like a successful company means that it is financially successful. And the wonderful thing about business is that the yardstick is so clear, and but it preserves perfect utility for a whole set of people who might have heterogeneous, values in life. So, so I and we can maybe put a pin in that, and we can talk about, money as a motivator, limiting factor after. There's some interesting stories about it. But I do agree that the best founders are obsessed with power. I just think that there's a massive amount of volatility or a huge dispersion, and it's why you see people who have been like the most successful people, like the biggest, like we're talking, the multi-hundred billion, trillion-dollar type companies. I think that's true, and I think it's also why there's plenty of examples of either companies can't grow because the founders are unable to detach power from control, and it's also why I think you see a lot of successful, people eventually even leave business because maybe they're so successful that they're not interested in that. Historically, many successful people have gone into politics or whatever because they want sort of the domain of their influence to either change or to expand. And it's also why, frankly, you see a lot of founders blow themselves up because they frankly aren't either they are not benevolent in their power, or frankly they're incompetent, and so they blow it up because they have power and they don't know what to do with it. So I would say I agree with it, and I think it's why you also see like the examples that prove the examples that the upside examples, and there's many downside examples.
I think Pirati is the best example for the power side of things. Like, I think every startup produced like after the PayPal era, Pirati is connected in one way or the other with it, and I mean that we don't get to see that a lot. Fame is, it's really weird. Like everyone knowing you, I don't know why someone would want that in startups, I'd say. But what about, like, you talked about money too. Some people are really driven by money, and it has been sort of ostracized by people in the society that people should not be driven by money, and it's taboo to say that someone is driven by money. So, what's up? Like a lot of young founders who do want to get started want to make some amount of money because they come from a background where they did not have a lot of money or stuff like that. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is like an interest. I think it's one of the most. It's both disingenuous and it's also, I think, one of the strangest sort of, kind of quirks is that like a desire or a motivation of money is somehow like the least sort of moral. Especially of those three motivators. Like, I don't know those are like, that's the irreducible set of motivators, but like, I think it's, I think it's like, whatever, it's a decent approximation for it. But it's like, okay, so what money is the only one of those objectives, right? Which is used to get what you want in a way that rewards the person on the other side of the transaction, right? So if I have fame, I can make you do things because you know who I am, right? I can walk into a restaurant and I get a table because I'm famous. And so, and especially, this is especially true as fame has become commodified, right? So, you have a famous friend and someone, screws up their hotel room, they can like take down a hotel with a tweet, right? So hopefully they don't do that, but that's what fame gives them, right? Fame gives them this thing where everyone knows who they are, and they and to some extent they get privilege from that, regardless of whether they had any value on the other side, right? Now, yeah, it's just the way it is. Power is similar. Power is I can tell you to do something, right? Either because of an implicit or an explicit control over you that exists. Either I have political power or I have some sort of social power or like whatever. I can compel compel you to do things. All money can do is allow you to offer to offer trade. And so if I have no money, then I can't offer that much. And because I can't give that much to other people in free exchange for goods and services. If I have a ton of money, I can just offer that up. There's ways that people build power and fame that are actually highly moral, right? Like being an incredible member of your community, being more, highly well respected, always acting ethically. Those do give you fame and or power, right? And so if you just have money and you just don't have any sort of other, you haven't built, social wealth or whatever, social capital, you can just kind of be a sort of a douche all the time and just get stuff, right? Which is kind of lame. But the downside to it's not super high. Like the downside to a douchebag who just like pays his way into like a club or something is like that people don't really like him. They sort of have to tolerate him, but they all got money. So it's like, okay, whatever, right? The downsides to power and fame are much higher because that's what leads to, all sorts of like really big systemic problems. So I always find it interesting. The other thing that's incredible about money itself, and this is very basic economics, is that it's perfectly fungible. And so what that means is that we can assemble a group of people who have highly different goals, material goals, and unify them with one motive. So when we start a company, we have a profit motive. Our goal is to make more money. And assuming we built the company in the right way, we all benefit or, are harmed if the company, by the company's P&L. But what that means is that if you care about donating to, saving the whales, and I care about Ferraris, we can work together in perfect harmony without having to debate whether Ferraris or whales are, more virtuous. And that's the beauty of money and of for-profit organizations. It's one of the reasons why government and nonprofit organizations are much harder to design and run, because there is not a profit motivation. And so you get these, you sort of have to have these, arguments that can become intractable, especially at large scale, of what's more important, right? What's more important in a nonprofit? Which objective is more important? Is the company culture? How important that should factor in? Should we pay ourselves a lot? Should we pay ourselves a little? All those things in a free market and that is also profit driven. Those things all, the feedback loop is so fast, they solve themselves, right? And everyone goal seeks towards that profit motive, but then they can use the profits for whatever they want in their personal life. If I have no kids, I might not care, at all about public school or something like that. And I might not own a house and pay no property tax. I just, whatever, I do what I want. And if someone else might have 10 kids and they care a lot about local community, whatever. So that's why I think it's funny when if you like look down upon, because I just view it as while it can be, somewhat, well, the downside of it is, sort of visible, but it's not really that bad compared to other types of motivators, which have way higher downsides.
Do you think everyone is driven by money, or everyone relatively who has had relatively more impact on the world? Are all of them driven by money, or are more than, like for Joe, for example, if we just put him on the stand there, what do you think is Joe most driven by? Money? Is money a part of it, rather? Better question to ask.
I think that he's motivated by, I think he's motivated by money for sure. I think that, Josie, he certainly hasn't optimized around like pure dollars, right? Above a certain point. We do, we have a policy institute called the Sister Institute, which he's dedicated, a lot of, resources and time to, and also we helped start a university called the University of Austin, focused on sort of truly classical, liberal education, along with Barry Weiss and Al Ferguson and a bunch of other people. And I think that if you were just focused on money, you probably wouldn't spend your weekends doing that. And so I think he has a unique motivating stat. I mean, I guess you could call that power in the benevolent sense of wanting to impact the world. He certainly feels a much larger duty to do that than I would say that I do. Although it's not like, I think we're highly aligned. It's just like the magnitude of his vector is much higher, but there's another kind of element, which is, so many more people's strengths, at least in a democracy, a democracy with free markets. It's actually somewhat rare that people's skill sets, fall in both or in multiple types of categories. Like, being a politician requires like this weird game of like getting elected and doing all these things that many people who are very good at making money are not very well suited for, frankly. And many people in politics like would never be able to make any money, but they can get elected and stuff. And so there's, again, going back to it, not making yourself the thing is important here. I think many of our politicians have made themselves the thing, right? They think they're like the most important people in the world, as opposed to viewing it as, hey, they have a skill set and they want to collaborate with people who actually know how to do things. I think the business world tends to be much better about that, which is, either in charity or in politics, the other sort of outlets of society, they will earn money and then give that money to people who are good in these other domains, even in academic research, medical research, things like that. And so I think that's, I think that that's a way that, again, a financial and, motivation can end up being supportive of other types of, either people with other types of motivation or other skills.
What other motivations have you seen in people, like the financial ones?
Well, I mean, I think the most interesting thing about financial motivations is I think you're basically right. Like, I think everyone has them, right? And I think that there's tons of people who like pretend they don't, but then like they obviously do. I mean, if you ask them, hey, do you like want this dollar or not want this dollar? They would either say like, I don't need it, you should have it, or I'll take it. Like, both are actually, like, both of them are showing thought about it, right? Like, only like, I mean, it's just biological. It is the way that we interact. It's also kind of funny because I hear a lot of people say like work-life balance or, corporate cultures that are like whatever. And it's okay, so what's the alternative? The alternative is selfishness, right? Like, regardless of whether you're in a full communist society or you're in a full free market, you working is contributing to other people. That's definitionally what it is, right? Like, if you're in a communist society with no market and you're working in the fields or whatever your job is, it was, that the czar told you to do, you think that the czar is going to be happy if you're just like, oh yeah, sorry, like work-life balance? Like, no way. The czar is going to kill you probably, or force you to do more labor because that's the only way that stuff gets done. People need to eat the food, right? At least the czar does. And in a free market society, the same way. Oh, I don't want to, I want to check out from work. So what? That you just don't provide products and services to people who need them or want them is like, it's like, do you like when on your day off, when you want to go out to eat, if no one's working, like that pisses you off probably, right? So it's funny because no type of society that's ever existed is there like this idea of not participating, except for one, which is ones that enslave other people and force them to do the stuff so that they can sit around, right? So the only type of social dynamic where like work-life balance is a thing is the most fucked up thing ever, because you're basically just saying you want other people to do stuff for you and you never have to do anything for them because basically you control them. And so I find it very interesting. Now, I think there's, of course, trade-offs, right? For instance, spending time with your family, right? People you love is not work, and it's very important. And so I do think over time, like there does have to be some balance as it relates to, other parts of life that are highly fulfilling. I don't think most young people have anything better to do though. Like if you're not married, you don't have kids, and you live in the United States, right? And you grew up in the United States. I don't know what possibly you could do other than, recreational, some recreational, like some stuff on the margin, right? That would be more important. And so I think it's funny when people, admonish startup culture or Wall Street culture or whatever for working so hard. Partially one, because the hours that people are working in those are only marginally more than what the average person has to work in most other countries, number one. And they're being financially rewarded for it in a huge way. And lastly, it's like, shouldn't that be the most interesting thing that you have going on when you're early 20s? Isn't that probably where you're going to meet your significant other that will then result in you having something actually worth doing outside of work? And so I just, I have many hobbies. I have all these things that I like to do, with time on the weekend. It's good, to do those things, but they're just selfish things, right? Like me playing golf is like, it's a selfish thing. So some amount of selfishness is probably okay, but I don't think we need to be working like 3-hour work days, like, 4 days a week or whatever. I view it as like massive self-indulgence being branded as some sort of, critique of capitalism, which is ridiculous to me.
I think this is incredible. I think we'll take a hard stop there. Maybe we'll do one in the future. But I learned a lot of this one. I'm so glad I got the chance to get some things off my head too. And one question I'd like to end with. I've been into startups, VCs, and all these things since I was 11. What do you think is one fact that will blow 11-year-old me mind?
About startups and
Anything.
About anything?
Anything. Literally anything.
Okay. That's a very good question. And I think there's a few different ways to answer it. Okay. So what I would say is the first, basically, this anecdote about compounding, right? Which is like how a very small difference that happens every day adds up to a huge difference over a year or, whatever. And I think that it's why and it's even underappreciated, I think, by a lot of startup founders. And it leads to something which we always talk about, which is it's almost always the case that a founder will overestimate how much they can accomplish in 1 year. And they almost will always underestimate what's possible in 5 years. And so I think it means that if you're young, you have a huge advantage in the sense that, let's say you got 1% smarter in a specific area every year, right? You may seem like, oh yeah, I don't really know much that more than my friends or whatever. But after 5 or 6 years, you could know a ton more. And if you look for daily habits like that when you're really young, then you have this huge unfair advantage because most people aren't paying attention to it, or they're trying to do many, many things as opposed to doing a few things. And so very young people can actually accomplish a lot by just focusing on the small incremental win every single day that adds up to a tremendous amount. And this is talked about a lot as it relates to saving money or something, or Warren Buffett talks about it, which is true, by the way. It's far more, I think, important to think about it as it relates to knowledge, skills, emotional intelligence, things like that, because it's those things also compound. Basically, everything I view in the world, you can compound on it. The other sort of piece of advice I would give, and it doesn't have a data point on it, but I could make one up, but it's that and this is counterintuitive to at least advice I was given, is your weaknesses don't actually matter that much. Your strengths matter a ton more. When you're young, you should try to work on your weaknesses because you don't actually know whether they're weaknesses or not. I didn't even take pre-calculus really in high school. I ended up studying math because I thought I was bad at it. It turned out that I needed someone to tell me why math could help me become basically successful, to focus on it. So I think when you're young, you should try to work on weaknesses because they might actually end up being strengths. And frankly, there's a certain level you have to reach. Like, you should be able to like talk to someone and look them in the eye. That's helpful, So if you can't, you should work on that. But like, you don't need to be like George Clooney or Bill Clinton to be successful. It might just be you're not that, and instead you should focus on engineering or something, right? Or vice versa. If you're not good at engineering, you're not good at math. You've tried, but you're really charming. You should think about, wow, I'm maybe like a 200 EQ person, right? So it's about, try a requisite amount of time when you're young to like figure out the strengths and weaknesses, and then lean into the strengths super hard, but then be aware of those weaknesses and look for people who have as big or a bigger spike than you do in the area you are deficient. This applies to business, it applies to friendship, and it applies, frankly, to who you ultimately, make as a significant other. It's surrounding your group of people with people who have things that you don't, and being able to see that as a super skill and take pride in that, as opposed to feeling uncomfortable that they are better than you, is a secret of almost all successful people. And it's a thing that when you're young, especially if you're young and you're ambitious, and maybe you're, you have a chip on your shoulder that you forget. And so I'd say compounding in terms of getting better yourself, but then doing that in areas where you have a superpower, and then looking for others who complement it, is probably the best sort of generalized advice I'd have for someone young.
All right, that blew 50-year-old me mind. And I think that being there, that's it from my side. Anything you'd like to say?
No, listen, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for the persistence on it, and I hope we meet in person sometime soon.